Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the good, the bad, and the inconsistent of Summer League so far. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Happy Thursday, everybody, and I guess happy Wolves game day, right? Summer League game today, the fourth game of the opening schedule for the Wolves. At this point, it looks like they'll have just a fifth and final game. They won't advance into the Summer League playoffs. But game today, we'll talk about that on Friday's show. We'll do effectively a post-game pod talking about that. Today, though, the good, the bad, and the inconsistent of Summer League so far for the Timberwolves. And we'll get into that here in just a moment. First of all, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. If you haven't downloaded it, go check it out on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. Let's go ahead and dive in on the good, the bad, and the inconsistent is what we're going to call this. I wouldn't say that there hasn't been an ugly so far, really. I mean, like, obviously there's certainly been ugly moments. It is Vegas Summer League after all. And we are talking about a lot of guys that have pretty limited NBA experience. So there certainly have been ugly moments, but the Wolves have played well overall. They won the first two games by multiple possessions. They came back from a 16-point deficit. And despite shooting the ball just terribly in game 3, they only lost by a bucket and had a chance to win it in the final possession of the game. So, and I'm focusing, of course, more on individual performances than on team performance for Summer League, because for all the reasons I already cited, performances are all over the map for everybody team-wise. But they've been competitive as a team. I want to focus more on individual players and individual facets and aspects of individual players' games, if that makes sense. So, for instance, I would say the thing that's been most encouraging to me so far, but also not surprising, because there's a couple things that are surprising, and I'll explain what I mean, when we come across those. But like the one thing that's been most encouraging that I was hoping would be the case and expected is strong, but I think the Wolves really needed to see is Josh Minot's activity level so far in Summer League. And if you had asked me to tell you who I thought Josh Minott was as a player, I would have said steals, blocks, rebounds, offensive rebounds, alley-oop dunks, playing in the dunker spot, running in transition, trying to dunk on guys, knocking down a spot up three here and there. He's done all those things except for the three-point shooting. He's been really active throughout Summer League, and he has done the steal thing, the block thing, the stocks. He's done a really good job with that. Overall, he's averaging, by the way, Summer League stats, if anybody knows where to find, I could not find legit, individual player stats for some. I mean, I found them on NBA.com, but you can't sort it by team. You can look at team, but you can't look at individual player within the team. It's really dumb. The filtered tool doesn't work. Anyway, he's averaging 1 steal and 1 block per game in Summer League and just under 30 minutes per game. He is only shooting 37% from the floor, and I mentioned the three-point shooting. He's only 15% on threes so far in Summer League. I think he's 2 of 15 or something like that. But he's also getting to the line nearly 7 times per game, and he's shooting 85% at the line. So if the Timberwolves said, hey, Josh Minott, you're going to be a part of the rotation this year, we're going to give you some rotation minutes. He's never going to play 29 minutes a game. But if he can make, if he could be 33% from outside the arc and just make defenses think, and if he carries forward that same rebound rate, he's averaging a shade under 9 rebounds per game across 3 games and 2 stocks per game. That rate would be palatable, more than palatable. And that's exactly what I wanted to see out of Josh Minott in Summer League is the do stuff ability, as I coined last summer when talking about Josh Minott's upside. I think he's done all of the things the Wolves need to see him do except for make some threes. And he's very unlikely to be a sharpshooter. I know Jaden McDaniels jumped from 30% to 40% pretty much in a year and then back down to 33%. So what's the outlier here? Quite possibly that 40% that he shot in the 22-23 season. I hope I'm wrong. So there could be rapid improvement at some point for Josh Minott. The shot still is stiff. It's still awkward looking and not consistent enough from outside the arc, at least. But he's still trying to yam on guys in the open court. He's still blocking shots. He's still running the floor. He's still getting offensive rebounds. He's still, attacking closeouts, although nobody's closing out on him in a regular season game. That's just not going to happen. Which is the primary reason why he needs to be able to at least keep defenses honest with some semblance of an outside shot. But all the other stuff that I've talked about that Josh Minott needs to do to earn a rotation spot in the NBA, he's doing that. So that to me falls under the category of it's under the good and it's under the expected. Now, something that's a good thing that I wasn't expecting, Daishen Nix. And I knew he was a high volume, relatively low efficiency scorer. Like, that's not surprising anybody. But I think the overall aggressiveness and also the defense, he's been really good defensively. And caveat, obviously, Summer League caveats apply to the whole week's worth of shows, right? And last week and the next several days. I get it. It's Summer League. But we have to evaluate based on what's in front of us. And Daishen Nix, to me, like, Summer League's got a lot of really good athletes. It's got a lot of top picks. It's got guys who have played professionally before. We still got a guard, and not everybody guards in Summer League. And for the most part, other than some stretches, and especially in Game 3 when the defense disappeared at times as a team, Daishen Nix has been impressive defending. And I was not expecting that at all. He's also averaging 3.3 stocks per game. So more than Josh Minott, which I wasn't expecting. Again, defensive activity and mostly on the ball too. He's got really good size for a guard, but he's not, jumping passing lanes with the effectiveness as a Josh Minott or a Terrence Shannon Jr. Like, this is more on the ball. He had the poke away steal in Game 1. Like, he's got a few of those. And also, to go along with that activity, 6 rebounds per game. Got 18 rebounds across 3 games in Summer League, 31 minutes per game. So he's getting plenty of run. But I was not expecting, like, in my mind, this is empty scoring is kind of a harsh term, but low efficiency volume scoring without much defense or rebounding. That's what I was expecting out of Daishen Nix, because that's what he's done, did for a couple of years with the Houston Rockets. It's what he did last year in the G League for the Iowa Wolves for the most part. But clearly the defense is improving. And he even said, I think he said this after maybe Sunday's game, he made a comment to the media about how, seeing Anthony Edwards compete on every possession. Well, not every possession, but compete regularly defensively. Seen Nickeil Alexander-Walker, seen Jaden McDaniels, seen Mike Conley, seen these guys defend on the perimeter on a nightly basis when he was on the bench, leading the bench mob for the Timberwolves. That was encouraging and inspiring to him. And now you have Daishen Nix just guarding his tail off in the Summer League. And it speaks certainly to Daishen and his wanting to get better, taking this seriously, because I talked about this last week. I kind of expected some of these guys, Daishen especially, like, could they come into Summer League, too cool for school? I've been in the league. I played, however many dozens of NBA games Daishen Nix has been in. I was on the bench last year in the conference. Like, I know how this thing works. I'm just getting some reps. But he's taken this extremely seriously and has tried to be the best player on the floor, and probably has been the most consistent, best all-around player, either him or Josh Minott, thus far in the Summer League for Minnesota. So the 6 rebounds per game, the nearly 3.5 stocks per game are great. He's only 40% from the field, but he's gotten to the line. He got the line 15 times in the last game. So overall, he's averaging 11 free throw attempts per game, which has to lead. I got to check this. Yeah, that leads the entire Summer League, and he's 76% from the line. So that's buoyed his scoring number. He's averaging over 17 a game on just 40% shooting, 30% threes, but 76% from the line on 11 attempts per game in the Summer League. So really good performance by Daishen Nix. And frankly, the aggressiveness on both ends of the floor, including even offensively, and some of the risks he's taken with the ball in his hands that for the most part have worked out, and especially defensively, has really, really pleasantly surprised me. So the Minot activity wasn't surprising. The Knicks activity is. It's all under the category of good. I've got 2.5-ish more good things, a couple of bad things, and then we'll talk about what do we call it? We're not going to call it the ugly. We're going to call it the inconsistent of Summer League so far. We'll get to all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. And it's not just MLB tickets either. It's tickets to really anything. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Plus, they have all-in pricing. Just toggle the feature on to show you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. And they also have a lowest price guarantee. If you find tickets at a better price elsewhere, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. As always, Game Time ticket coverage means that your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long? If so, no doubt you have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting. Instead, make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right. Let's talk a couple more good things. Terrence Shannon Jr., or apparently he wants to be called TJ now. So I'm going to try and I've already said Terrence Shannon Jr. like that phrase together so many times over the past couple of weeks. TJ Shannon, I like all the stuff I expected to see from him. And I said before Summer League, I thought he would be a standout in Summer League because of his skill set, what he's really good at doing, volume scoring. Yes, but also wreaking havoc in transition, getting out in transition and dunking on guys and getting 3-point opportunities and opportunities outside the arc, draining threes. All of the above has come true. He's averaging 18 a game, 60% shooting. He was pretty quiet in game 3, but the first 2 games are really active. 18 per game, 60% shooting, 29% outside the arc. The volume has actually been a little lower than I expected. 83% at the line, 6 attempts per game. He's averaging 3.7 rebounds and combined 2.7 stocks per game. So overall, really good activity in scoring. What I expected, what I've been most impressed by that I wasn't expecting though, is his on-ball defense, number one. And maybe that shouldn't be a surprise, and I'll explain why in a second. And then also his overall feel and how his NBA-ready body is already playing. The way Chris Finch described it when he was interviewed, I think it was the first game, he was interviewed from the stands by the whatever crew was doing the game, the national TV crew, and he said that they like Terrence Shannon. He mentioned his NBA-ready body, which I talked about after they drafted him, actually before they drafted him, as in my draft profile series, but also that in Finch's words, he, quote, hits first, meaning he's initiating contact on both ends of the floor. And I've been impressed with how savvy it's been. And yeah, he's been called for some fouls. Who hasn't in Summer League? And everyone was called for 1 billion fouls and that's only a little bit of exaggeration in game 3 on whatever day that was, Tuesday, because there were a ridiculous number of fouls called. But he seems to have really good awareness and spatial awareness and understanding of what he can and can't get away with, or at least he's learning that. And there will be a learning curve at the NBA level. It's going to be different than the Big Ten, certainly in terms of physicality and the level of physicality that's allowed. And by that, I mean, it's just a different level, right? Because in some ways, the NBA is going to be far more physical just because dudes are bigger and more athletic and more talented. And you just got to have, I talked about having an NBA body, an NBA frame, but also there's potentially more fouls called in certain situations. So it's a different type of physicality. So once we get to real NBA games, not summer league, I'm curious to see how that plays for Terrence Shannon Jr., for TJ Shannon. But thus far, I've been impressed. He's drawn a ton of fouls. He's used his body correctly defensively to stay in front of guys, to initiate contact in a good way, in a solid way. So his on-ball defense and his feel have impressed me the most. And, of course, on-ball defense is something, not to rehash too much of what I've said previously on this, but his steal rate dipped. He played 3 years at Texas Tech, went to Illinois. Steal rate went down. The first year at Illinois went down again. His second year in Illinois, at Illinois. And there were some scouting reports out there pre-draft that, like, hey, the effort level wasn't always there defensively. So I asked Sonny from Lockdown Illini about a week ago about this when he was on the show, and he said this was basically just because he was always guarding the other team's best player. So that's part of it. And then the second piece of it is he was always exhausted because of that, and because he was the focal point of the Illini offense. So there's lots of factors that go into it, but it seems like he's giving effort all the time, and he certainly has been in summer league, and that's been really impressive to me. Jaylen Clark's defense, also in the good category. Didn't play as much in game 3, but in the first 2 games, his defense was awesome. I don't know that I need to say a whole lot else about that. If you watched, especially game 2, he had 6 steals. And the defense plays. Like, as long as he's there physically, I mean, this dude's already going to be one of the better point of attack defenders in the league. And he's got good enough size to guard, pretty much all 2s and many 3s. 6'5", 6'9" wingspan. He doesn't look quite that big on the floor, but the wingspan really adds to that. And I would say he's the 2/3 version of Josh Minott defensively, but probably even better, and certainly a little bit quicker laterally because he's so much smaller. But the athleticism isn't overwhelming, but it's certainly played well enough in summer league. So I've been really impressed with his defense. My last thing in the good category is Rob Dillingham's overall feel. And yeah, the shooting's been ugly. It has been. I'm going to pull up exactly what his percentages are here. Again, bear with me. The stats here are just not. They don't pull like you'd want them to. Here we go. Rob Dillingham thus far he's playing just under 29 minutes per game, and he's averaging 9.3 points per game on 28% shooting from the field, 25% on 3s, only 2 free throw attempts per game. He's 83% on 2 attempts per game, which is what? I don't know, 5 or 6, I think. 6.7 assists, which is nice, but 3.3 turnovers, which is not so nice. But also could be worse. Or I'm sorry, that's not turnovers. Hang on. Here's turnovers. I'm telling you, man. Basically the same number. 3 turnovers per game to 6.7 assists per game. So here's what I do like, though. The feel, the decision-making. Game 3 got a little ragged, but the first 2 games I thought it was very good, and he still had positive moments. I think he had 7 turnovers and 7 assists in the 3rd game of Summer League. But I've been impressed with his feel about when to push the pace. Again, except for a small handful of possessions in that 3rd game where it's like the other team had watched, they probably did watch tape on his first 2 Summer League games. Like, oh, okay, any chance this dude gets, he's just going to hit a head pass. Like, just go. Let's jump in front of that. Let's pick it off. Let's get a pick 6 on him. I think he's dealt with on-ball pressure pretty well. And I think the passing in the pick and roll has been good. He's had some nice passes to Jesse Edwards in pick and roll. I think he's looked the part and clearly has the NBA skill of certainly ball handling, but the feel to be able to orchestrate the half-court offense. And one of the potential knocks on him that I didn't agree with, but some people wondered about the playmaking because he so often was scoring for himself. SEC 6th Man of the Year. Like, he came off the bench at Kentucky to score for himself, not necessarily to initiate for others all the time, but when he needed to, or when the opportunity presented itself, I thought he did. And I think the passing skill is clearly there. We've seen that so far in Summer League. So I don't have concerns around that. And that's actually been pretty good in my opinion. All right, let's talk about the bad. And let's talk about the consistency issues, we're going to call it, instead of the ugly. Try and put a glass half full spin on this thing. That spin's strong. It doesn't need to be a spin. It's been fine. But we're going to look at it glass half full. We'll do that here next. All right, so we talked about the good. Josh Minott's activity level, not a surprise. Daishen Nix's aggressiveness at both ends of the floor, especially his defense, a surprise. Terrence Shannon Jr., TJ Shannon's defense and his feel, somewhat of a surprise. The way he uses his body defensively and offensively drawing fouls has been really good. Rod Dillingham, overall feel on the floor, passing ability, good. Jaylen Clark's defense, really good. The bad, shooting across the board. You name a player, I'll tell you that they've struggled to shoot the basketball. That's I don't know what else. There's not really a whole lot else I need to say about that. Like we already talked about Dillingham, he's 25% for three. Josh Minott's like 2 of 15. Terrence Shannon's not great right now either. What's he? Like 30-ish%, I believe. He is 28.6%, so just a shade under 30% outside the arc. You name the player, they've struggled from outside the arc for the Wolves. And they're not shooting like an overwhelming volume of threes either. They don't have anybody in the top 10 in terms of 3-point rate here in Summer League. In fact, they don't have anybody like in the top 25 in terms of attempts per game. So 3-point shooting, like that's the bad. I don't know, like everything else is just not surprising for Summer League in terms of defensive consistency, which has overall been decent. Passing, we've talked about. Defensive intensity has been good overall. Free throw shooting has been really good. Rebounding's actually been pretty good as well for a team that's a little bit undersized outside of Jesse Edwards. I think Minot and Leonard Miller have both done well there. So it really is 3-point shooting. And if they had shot the ball better from three, they're an easy 3-0. And their differential, which is, of course, a tiebreaker. If they were 3-0, the point differential plays into the tiebreaker, or it is the tiebreaker, other than head-to-head, in order to advance the semis. Like, they'd certainly be in that conversation if they just shot like a normal percentage or even slightly below average. But they've been brutal from outside the arc. And it's tough because when we talk about the 10th man role on the Wolves roster, you'd love it to be somebody who's not a non-shooter. Because as it stands right now, Rudy Gobert is the only non-shooter in the top 9 of this rotation, assuming Rob Dillingham's got one of those spots. He hasn't shot it all that well in Summer League, but we know he'll shoot it. So Rudy's the only non-shooter. And, you know, Kyle Anderson's no longer in the rotation. He's with Golden State. So you don't want to fill his role with somebody else that can't shoot from outside the arc. And Josh Minott, Leonard Miller, to a lesser extent, those guys, and possibly even Jaylen Clark. I've talked less about him as a potential fit there with that 10th man role, and Terrence Shannon. Those guys all have to prove they can shoot. Shannon's got the inside track when it comes to that. All right, the inconsistent. Everybody has been inconsistent everywhere except for Josh Minott and I guess Daishen Nix, although the consistency there hasn't been great. Josh Minott's basically done the same thing every game, and he's done it well. He's done the extra stuff. Would it be nice to see him score more efficiently? Yeah, but that's not going to be his role in the NBA. So it doesn't need to be his role in Summer League. And consistency from everybody else has been, I think, lacking is a fair word to use. In terms of that 10th spot, and here's what I mean by that. If you missed my kind of, I'll give you the elevator pitch here, if that makes sense. What I mean by that. The Timberwolves have 7 of their top 8 rotation guys returning, the 5 starters, plus Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Naz Reid. And it's I think fair to presume that Joe Ingles is going to have a spot. That's 8 guys. The Timberwolves have already said Rob Dillingham is going to have a spot. And also he is the backup. He's the only other point guard on the roster besides Mike Conley. That's 9 guys. Who is the 10th spot? Last year at the beginning of the year, that was Troy Brown Jr. At times it was Jordan McLaughlin. At times it was, McLaughlin and Monte Morris kind of flip-flop there toward the end of the year. It was never really anybody else. Like there was nobody else that really saw rotation minutes there. And at times it was only a 9-man rotation. And that's kind of how the 10th man works in the NBA for most of these teams. Some teams will always play 10 guys. Some teams will do like hockey line shifts where it's 5 for 5 occasionally. A lot of times those are, tanking teams or rebuilding teams, we'll call them, I guess. Chris Finch doesn't really do that. Some nights he'll play 10, some nights he'll play 9. Some nights, depending on the matchup, the 10th guy will play more. So my take on it has been Josh Minott gives you one thing And I think Josh Minott and Terrence Shannon, TJ Shannon are the two that have the inside track. They both do different things. Leonard Miller, Jaylen Clark are the outside options. And maybe it's just whoever fits the matchup the best. And all those guys obviously need to stay ready anyway. But it's going to be really fascinating. That's the only real competition, I think, heading into training camp that the Wolves have that Chris Finch has to sort out. I don't necessarily know if there is anybody with the inside track other than everything I've already said about Josh Minott today. I think Josh Minott has made a case as his do stuff ability. Now, I talked about the non-shooter thing. He's theoretically a better shooter than Kyle Anderson, even though Slow-Mo shot over 40% from three. Not this last year, obviously, but the year before. All quarter threes, sure, but it was effective. 1 3 per game, and he shot it over 40%. That's great. If Josh Minott could do that, and I certainly think there's more upside there than with Slow-Mo, no question, then he could be a valuable rotation player. But TJ Shannon's ability to shoot the basketball and guard multiple positions, albeit a smaller body, lengthwise and height-wise than Josh Minott, I think TJ Shannon's got a slight edge because of, we talked about already what he's done well too. Those two to me are the ones battling it out for the most part. I think, again, depending on matchup, say Mike Conley sits out a game or Nickeil Alexander-Walker tweaks an ankle. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Jaylen Clark's going to have a shot. I think he'll have a shot at that. If there's a longer-term injury or absence for a big man, maybe Leonard Miller gets a shot. I think he's probably last of those four in the competition, if we want to call it that, and I guess I am. So I would say TJ Shannon and Josh Minott lead the way. And depending on matchup or who's not available, Jaylen Clark would have a shot. So fascinating to watch this unfold. We have one more Summer League game scheduled for sure, and that is today. That's Thursday afternoon. I think it's an evening. Yeah, it's an evening game. It's a late one. It's like 11 p.m. Central. So that's Thursday night. I'll be back Friday. We'll talk about what happens in Thursday's game. We'll peek ahead to what's next. I believe they'll play next on Saturday or Sunday, and then they'll be done in Vegas. So we'll talk about that early next week on the show. And then we'll move on to a couple other kind of bigger picture offseason topics. We're still daily through the month of July. A reminder, you can watch this show on YouTube. You can also download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app and watch it on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And, of course, you can listen anywhere. And a big thank you for those that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. It is greatly appreciated. Be sure to check out the shows over on Locked On Sports Minnesota, the Minnesota Basketball Party. Actually, the audio of that is the episode right before this on the Locked On Wolves feed on audio. And if you're watching on YouTube, hop over to Locked On Sports Minnesota. Check out what those guys talked about this week. I wasn't there for the basketball party, but go check it out on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel just the same. A big thank you for making us your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. As we said, it's also part of the Locked On Sports and Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.